guys. I just wanted to come on here and chat with you a little bit about what I'm going to ask you to do in class today so that you can get started. So first of all, my question for today is, what is slope? So you might think about that for a minute. If you had to define the word slope, what would you say? Well, if I had to define the word slope, I think I would define it as the steepness of a line. And so on your note sheet, go ahead and just write that in. Slope is the steepness of a line. You could also describe slope as the flatness of a line, but basically slope is just how steep that line is. So it can be almost flat, or it can be very, very steep. Sometimes when we think of slope, we think about a mountain, like climbing a mountain or coming down a mountain, and those are good representations of slope, but not the only thing with slope. So we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of slope, and to do that, I'm going to introduce you to the slope guy. You can draw this right there on your note sheet as well, but we're going to start with a positive slope, and a positive slope is, as we read left to right, the line is going up from the left to right. So we're going to go ahead and put a little plus sign under there, and we're going to write the word positive to the side. So if that's a positive slope, we also have a negative slope, which again, as we're reading from left to right, it's going down. So we're going to label that one negative, and we'll put a little minus sign there. Now, aside from those 2 slopes, we have 2 that are kind of unusual. Those are the 2 types that we see most of the time, the positive and the negative. But we also have a slope that goes straight up and down, and we're going to call that one an undefined slope. And I'm just going to put here at the bottom a U to describe that that's an undefined slope. And then the last one that we have is the one that goes straight flat. And I'm going to put 2 zeros at the end of that one because that's a 0 slope line. So if you look at that, you might have to use your imagination just a little bit, but it looks a little bit like a face with our eyes, our nose, and our mouth. And we'll just call that guy the slope dude to help us remember the 4 types of slope: positive slope, negative slope, 0 slope, and undefined slope. All right. Now, the next thing I want us to look at is how can we figure out what slope is. So you've probably experienced slope before, and we're going to look at 2 specific ways today. And both of these are kind of like those foundation things that we need to know so that we can be successful this chapter. So the first way that we're going to look at is how we can find slopes from a graph. And so I'm just going to go ahead and draw a coordinate plane. This would be the x-axis and this would be the y-axis. And I'm just going to draw a line here on the coordinate plane. So let's say our line goes through this point here and maybe this point up here. And so we'll draw that line. So you may have heard before that slope can be written as the fraction of rise over run. This is actually a good way of thinking about slope, rise being the change in the y value, because y values are what go up and down, divided by the change in the x value. And so if I look at these 2 points that I've created, then I would say the change from one point to the other in terms of y value would be up 1, 2, 3, 4. So it rose 4 and then ran 1, 2, 3. So it would have a slope of a fraction rise over run of 4 over 3. Now, looking at that line, thinking about our slope guy, that line is coming up as I go from left to right. So that would be a positive slope of 4 over 3. And we're just going to leave our slopes written as fractions if we can. Let's try one more of a negative slope. So if I have, again, my lines, let's say that my line goes through this point and this point out here. If I count my rise, looks like I'm changing between those two, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm running 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So my slope would be rise 4 over run 5. But this one is a negative slope, so I'd want to put a negative sign in front of that. Now some people just choose to look at that and determine each time should it be a positive slope or a negative slope line. But some people would look at that and say, this time my rise was actually a negative 4 because I went down 4 and then to the right 5. Or if you were looking at it from the other direction, if I counted from here, I would go up 4, but I would go to the left 5, which is a negative 5. So either way would get me a slope of negative 4 over 5. So you're going to have some examples today where you're going to have to find the slope based on a graph. Given a graph, you're going to have to figure out what the slope is. Now, the final way that we're going to look at these is, what if I give you 2 points? Sometimes they'll be on a graph, or sometimes I will just list them out. Is there a way for us to find the slope given 2 points? And so, yes, on a graph, we could easily graph those 2 points and then count the rise over run. But if we remember that slope, which is often in our class denoted by the variable m, or the letter m stands for slope, if we think about that as the change in y over the change in x, then we can come up with a formula that looks like this. It says y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. In other words, again, that's the rise divided by the run. And so we can find the slope without a graph by using that formula. So let me show you an example. If I give you the 2 points, if I say these 2 points, 3, 2 and 5, 7 are on my line, then I can find the slope by looking at the change in y's divided by the change in x's. Remember, in an ordered pair, we always have x values first, and it's the same reason because x comes first in the alphabet. So we have our x and then our y. And so what I would do is I would take the y value from one point and subtract the y value from the other point. So I would take 2 minus 7 divided by, and then I would take the x value from one point minus the x value from the other point and get 3 minus 5. So 2 minus 7 would give me an answer of negative 5, and 3 minus 5 would give me an answer of negative 2. Now, if I look at those, because they're both negative, a negative divided by a negative will become positive, and I will get a positive slope of 5 over 2. Order matters when we find slope. And so if I start with the 2 first and subtract 7, then I need to start with the 3 to subtract 5. Where order doesn't matter is it doesn't matter which point you start with. So if I had started with the 7 first minus the 2, 7 minus 2, and then I would do 5 minus 3. If you'll notice there, 7 minus 2 is 5, and 5 minus 3 is 2. I get the same slope of 5 over 2. And if I just wanted to check my work, I could graph those points over 3 up 2, and then over 5 up 7. And I do, in fact, see that that is a slope that's positive going up 5 over 2. Let's try one more, maybe 2 more, just to get the hang of this a little bit better. What if one of my points, or multiple of my points, has some negatives involved? So let's say negative 3, 2, and negative 5, 7. So again, my slope formula is the change in y's divided by change in x's. So I'm going to take my y values, and I'm going to take 2 minus 7 divided by, and then my x values, negative 3 minus negative 5. Now, what happens with a minus negative? Well, it's just like in English class when you have two negatives together. It actually means you're saying a positive thing. And so we're going to change that minus negative to a plus positive, and then we're going to solve. So 2 minus 7 would be negative 5. And then negative 3 plus 5 is actually a 2. So negative 5 over 2. Again, you could have gone the other way. We could have started with 7 minus 2, and then negative 5 minus a negative 3. I would end up with the same thing. It would just look like a 5 over negative 2, but that's still a negative 5 over 2. Remember that negative can either be in the numerator, in the denominator, or it can be just right out front, negative 5 over 2. We just can't put the negative with the top and the bottom because remember those two negatives actually make it a positive. All right, the last one I want to show you is what if I have a point, if I have a line that goes through these 2 points. Let's try 3, 7, and 3, negative 5. So y minus y, I would start with negative 5 minus 7, or again, you can do 7 minus negative 5, and then I would do 3 minus 3. Well, if I do negative 5 minus 7, I get negative 12, and 3 minus 3 gives me a 0. And if I try that in my calculator, negative 12 divided by 0, I'm going to get an error message. And the reason I'm going to get an error message is because this slope is actually an undefined slope. An undefined slope, if you remember back to our slope guide, that means that that point or that line is going straight up and down. So if I graph the point 3, 7 and the point 3, negative 5, I can confirm that that line is actually going straight up and down. And so that's why it's an undefined slope. If I had done a problem and I had gotten a slope of 0 over, let's say, 12 on the bottom, that one is a 0 slope because if I use my calculator to divide 0 by 12, I do in fact get an answer of 0. All right, so today you're going to be tasked with doing a couple of things. You're going to be tasked with finding slope from a graph and tasked with finding slope given 2 points. Again, both are really foundational skills that we're going to need to be able to be successful in the rest of this chapter. So please take this seriously, go through your activity, work your problems, and then make sure you turn them in before you go. Guys, have a great day. We'll see you next week.